Should we get started?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yep. Let me share my screen. Let me see here. Okay, do you see that?
Yeah, that helps.
Hmm.
Cool. So, thanks very much for attending this session, guys. It's really encouraging to see a lot of international attendees. We've got people from Canada, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Sydney, Melbourne, basically all around the world, really. So really nice to see everyone kind of getting together and actually spending their free time trying to improve their own skills and actually, get better at their careers. So thanks to you guys, really big kudos. I think a few notes just to mention before we jump into this. Number one, don't worry too much about taking notes. Um, we'll circulate notes. If you were in our last session, we've circulated notes at the end, and we'll try to send out the recording as well later in the week. So just sit back, try to absorb. Don't worry too much about typing everything down, especially with this sort of presentation style where we're trying to make it a bit more conversational, a bit more of storytelling, giving you guys examples and actions to actually do. So just with that sort of background, if we want to give you a bit of an overview of what we're doing here, we're again, this is about developing a problem-solving mindset as a young lawyer. It's not about not having to know the solution at this stage in our careers, but it's definitely a really good practice to actually start thinking about and help define the problems that you come across in your legal careers, thinking a bit broader beyond the immediate tasks, because really as a junior, a big chunk of the work that we're asked to do is really task-based, because your supervisors or people more senior to you really would have thought about the problem and the potential solutions, and then basically assigned you a task to actually do, rather than leaving that up to you. So that's just the natural way of learning. Don't feel pressured about having to know the answer, but if you can think a bit broader beyond the task you're actually given, that really sets you up well for future in your career. Secondly, we have a range of people here from, law students, law grads, all the way up to more than 3 PQE onwards. For those who are more advanced in your careers, you probably learn a lot of some of it through trial and error at least. But I think the next stage, and in my position and Daniel's position, where we're starting to give a bit more instruction, starting to do a bit more mentoring, it's really helpful to actually kind of take this and flip it around and think about how to actually teach people who are coming up under you as well. So hopefully it's a bit helpful for everyone. But really, over this session, what we're trying to go over is, the actions that you can actually take to be someone that is problem-oriented instead of task-oriented, to help define, manage, and solve problems as part of an effective legal team, and also show that you can be trusted to take on more responsibility at work. So I guess with that sort of in mind, the agenda is on the screen. Those are the topics that we're going to try and cover. But again, a bit more conversation, a bit more storytelling. And I guess with that in mind, just a bit of a quick intro about myself. I'm currently a construction lawyer at Pinson Masons. For the last few years, I've kind of been involved in graduate and junior lawyer training across, I guess, the last 2 firms I was at. Look, I realized pretty early on during law school that I had okay but not spectacular marks. So what I wanted to do was try to get as much work experience as possible, where I worked in in-house community legal centers, suburban law firms, national, international law firms, and now I'm trying to make it so that the advice that I'm giving, and Daniel as well, is really actionable and relatable for the people in your position.
Thanks, Jason. And just a brief background on me. So I'm Daniel. I'm working in Singapore right now, currently legal counsel at UBS Asset Management, and my practice is around private equity funds, private equity transactions. And like Jason, I think at this stage of my career, I realized that there are a lot of things I've done as a junior that I, could have been avoided had someone kind of warned me, forewarned me, or actually taught me properly. So the point of all these kind of webinars and us posting on LinkedIn and whatnot is to actually uh, spread awareness on common pitfalls that you'll realize you're going through as a junior, but also to make your practice more efficient, allow you to kind of thrive early on. So these things are kind of picked up along the way. I've done both in-house private practice, and I think what we're going to present here today is actually applicable for both industries.
Yeah, and hopefully, what you can take away from this is because you know a bit of what to do in certain situations, at least that'll give you a bit more of the confidence you need in the workplace. So anyway, those are the overarching goals. With that, let's try to kick off into the actual content of this. And like you see on the screen, the first thing is, try to be a problem-oriented person instead of a task-oriented person in the work that you do. And the first kind of action that you can do to actually show this is really basic, but taking proper instructions to help define the problem that you're given at work. So with all of these things, there's about, I've kind of broken it down into 5 key things that you'd want to know about when you're taking instructions, or, try to cover when you're giving instructions. So, any sort of situation, first thing you want to know is background, right? Who are you acting for? Your advice would be really different, or your task would be really different, depending on if you're acting for, as an example, a contractor or a principal where the risk profile is flipped. So it's really important to know who you're acting for. Um, it's good to know, it's good to ask about any facts that you should know in the scenario that you're given, um, and also any sort of key documents or emails that your supervisor or instructor has actually been given but may not have passed down to you. And again, these things are part of giving proper instructions. So, your supervisor should be giving you things in the outset. But again, giving instructions is a bit of an art form in itself, and not everyone's perfect at it. So the goal of this is kind of asking the right questions to meet them halfway. And that way you're both clear on what the problem is and what it is you need to do and how that fits into the big picture. So that's the first thing, getting the background. Um, the next thing is about getting the proper deliverables and being clear about what you need to deliver in your task. So, things that you would be wanting to do is understand what your colleague needs from you. But I think what might get overlooked a lot of times is what form is the deliverable that you actually need to give. So sometimes, it could be an email, it could be a formal memo, it could be markups to a document, or even just a quick chat. And if you are asking the question from the outset, at least you know exactly what form it is. And if it's a quick chat versus a formal memo, you can see how that could save you a lot of time and give them exactly what they need to solve the problem. Next is just kind of for your own information as well. It's a good idea to get an idea of the timing and budget that the instructions are part of, right? So more specifically, when exactly does your colleague need your work product to review? Not just when it needs to be sent out to the client. Try not to throw them a grenade at 7 p.m. at night when it needs to go out that day. If you're clear on that from the outset, at least you're giving them the work at the time that they need to review it and maybe come back to you and you can actually fix it up and have that opportunity to develop those skills as well. Another good thing to know is how much time do they expect you to take to actually do the work, or what's the budget for your time? Again, just kind of commercial issues in the law firms or the in-house that you kind of want to know. The fourth thing is more specifically for private practice, but a matter number, somewhere to bill your time and save your documents. And then lastly, something that we may not ask enough is how does our task fit into the bigger picture of things? So, for example, if you're doing a transactional deal and they're asking you to amend a specific contract in that transactional deal, just spending the extra five minutes or so asking about where that contract fits into a transactional structure, understanding the relationships between those parties, getting an idea of what your task is going to be used for down the line, and how different things play out and influence each other. That really helps frame the context of your work. It frames the problem that you're trying to solve, and it really helps to actually determine, that next step of what else can I do beyond this immediate task to solve the problem that you're trying to get me to help with. So those are the basic 5 things that go into proper instruction, taking and giving, background, deliverables, timing/budget, matter number, and how it fits into the big picture. I guess with some of these, once you have an understanding of these instructions, just a good thing to do in the workplace is, read back and confirm, clarifying anything that doesn't make sense to you. And then next, communicating and updating your colleague if anything changes. For example, if there's a deadline, if there's new information or documents, or if you're given a research case and you found something that goes completely opposite to what they were hoping, don't just wait until the end and give them a memo that says that. Say, by the way, I found it, found this might go against. What do you think we should do? How can I help to, put this into the context of what we're doing and solve the problem? And the final thing with this is, be in the habit of following up in a timely manner. I think it's always good to not assume that your emails or your work product has actually been read by your instructors or senior partners, especially if they're really busy. So for this, I think it's always a good idea to even send the email. If it's something important, give them a call as well. Say, hey, by the way, I've sent this, happy to discuss. And when you do that, you also put yourself in a position to actually be able to take that next step with them if they come back and say, hey, by the way, good memo or whatever you did, can we get your help with the next thing that this is on? So with that kind of in mind of how to properly frame a question as how to properly frame a problem as a junior lawyer in your position, the next thing is just thinking about what you can do to actually take it to the next step. So what can you do to take it beyond the immediate task that you're given? And again, don't focus too much about being worried about not knowing the solution. It's more about, hey, I'm thinking about the problem, I'm trying to solve it. Can we develop this muscle really in you to actually get into that way of thinking and the work that comes with that as well. So, the things that you can do is if you're given some sort of discrete task and they say, by the way, can you find me the answer to this, right? I don't think it's like there's many cases where they don't just need that answer and then flick that answer to the client. Or if they do, it's going to be in the context of a broader advice, or they say, or you could actually put that answer in a draft email for them to send on to the client so that you're getting involved in that next step. You're not just saying yes or no, this is the question, this is the answer. It's yes, I've found this answer, but by the way, I've also drafted something that you can flick onto the client if you want to. Happy to make those amendments if you want, but here's the next thing that I think you need to actually solve the problem. So that's one example. The other things that you might want to do is, think about the other members of your team or other departments that you can contact to help work on the actual broader problem. So, if you're doing, again, a transaction, this is kind of my background, right? If you're doing a project or a transaction and you find out that you're going to need expertise on a certain part of the question from another department, for example, tax, then take that initiative, say, hey, I've hit this, it looks like it needs specialist tax advice. What do you think? But by the way, if you think that's right, I'm happy to help you draft that email or do a first draft of that email to the tax department, trying to get their rates, blah, blah, blah. So again, that's showing that you're thinking about that next step. And the last thing is just, again, thinking about the problem, not the solution, but really just what are the things that you can do to actually improve on or build on the existing solution that you're trying to give or you're being told to give. And I guess a lot of this, maybe not in the frame of the actual work product, but for example, with business development, right? recently I was asked to actually write a white paper on a certain industry with the view, the ultimate problem is how do we get this in front of the client? How do we get more clients from this? So the task-based approach would be, hey, I've written this thing, here you go, let's click it out. But if we think a little bit broader, what else can we do? Well, you've got this paper, you can contact the marketing department for them. You can think about ways to actually break down that one piece of content into multiple pieces of content. You can try to talk to the other business development team members to, tailor that content or break it up and send it onto different platforms. These are all things that you can take the initiative to, if not do, to at least suggest. And it's showing that you're thinking about the problem solving approach rather than the immediate task that you've been given. So those are kind of my examples. Daniel, do you have anything specifically on this sort of point as well?
My examples are going to apply to the next solve your own problems bit because it ties nicely into it.
Sweet. Okay. Well, I'll leave that one to you.
All right, great. So just to follow on from Jason talking about problem solving is to obviously solve your own problems. But I think this is kind of like a mantra that you need to kind of adopt early on because it's, I think we're used to when we have a problem to kind of ask people right away. So, what is this kind of law? You automatically want to instinctively just ask your senior, ask someone about the problem. But in a law firm setting or in an in-house setting, that's consider kind of passing the problem upwards. It's not really taking ownership of the problem and not being responsible for the problem, which is what they, as a junior lawyer, you want to do. So it's always good to give it a go first and to propose a draft solution. Often senior lawyers will run through all possible solutions with you. So if you come to them and they'll say, well, have you considered this? Have you considered this? Have you considered this? If you have not considered any of those, it's going to look poorly on you. But if you have considered all of them and then you still couldn't find a solution, that's where they can help you and they're more willing to help you. Typical trap I actually always see, and I still run into that, is when I actually ask a lawyer to answer something, and like generally what is this provision or what is this and what is that? Their response is, "Did you check the legislation?" Always check the legislation. I'm sure Jason got caught up in that before too. I still get caught up in that. Once again, it just looks poorly when you haven't done your DD and you haven't done your background reading as well. Common questions you can ask yourself is this something I can solve myself? Do I need someone to help me? What can I do to try to solve this problem? Is it through conventional resources, or do I need to kind of speak to someone that has more expertise? And what resources can I use to solve this problem? So other juniors, their mid-level associates, other friends in the industry. So if you're talking about, say, white collar crime and you have a friend that's in that industry, may not be a lawyer, why not consider asking them, right? Online resources, your online library, your firm library, these are all kind of resources that are available to you. And once again, if you approach the senior partner or the senior associate and you basically said that you haven't checked some resources, it's going to look poorly on you. So I have
Yeah,
an
and
example. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
sorry, just to add on that, it's not limited to asking questions or just reading on the things that should be available to you. It's also a pretty common scenario where you've seen people go up to you and say, "Hey, yeah, I know you've asked me to do that task, but I've encountered this issue, right? So this IT issue doesn't work." And they kind of leave it at that, where they just kind of pass that problem back onto you, which colloquially can be called, passing the monkey, right? It was on their shoulders, and now because they came to you with just a problem and not a potential solution, they passed the monkey to you, and now it's your problem, and you need to feed and care for that monkey. So, what are you going to do about it? That's really transferring the initiative, and it's really just not the best way to approach it. Whereas if you're at least going in with a draft solution, telling them what you've thought about, you can take that next step and keep that initiative with you, keep that work with you, and also build up that sort of reputation with the person that you're working with.
Exactly. I think it just boils down to taking ownership once again of the task that you're given. And for example, I think we were talking about transactions. There was one time I was actually on this transaction where we're holding certain closing documents in escrow. Closing was going to be next week. But accidentally, through miscommunication and whatnot, these closing documents were actually sent to the corporate services, and it was filed as closed. So obviously, this is an issue because we're still waiting for payment. Closing documents were sent. It's considered closed legally. So at the time, my partner wasn't in town as well. So I was basically just working with a paralegal and my secretary. And I was maybe a year on the job. Very stressful. I thought I was going to get fired at that point. But basically, situations like this is where you kind of be resourceful, right? Who do you ask for? Do you speak to another associate if they've kind of run into this problem before? I did that. I spoke to the paralegals if they've done these deals before. I also spoke to the corporate services provider to kind of say, hey, listen, this is what happened. What solutions can you provide me? And at that time, it was also 4 a.m. in the BVI, so no one was picking up. So this is really taking ownership of a mistake, basically. It doesn't have to be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. Just take ownership. At the end of the day, I basically had to make a decision, and I emailed them and told them you need to change everything, stat everything. It was sent to manifest error. I emailed the partner immediately with the basic options that we could do. Number one, uh, consider it manifest error. Number two, have to draft ancillary resolutions to kind of solve this problem, which is not ideal because that means you're notifying the client that this happened, right? So once you lay out these kind of problems, these solutions, really taking ownership at this point is for me to actually act on it. So I acted on option A. I, eventually got everything sorted, the registered corrected, and the partner called back and obviously was not happy, but understood my rationale as to why I did what I did and why it was time sensitive. So the open communication, I think, is really key here. But essentially, they saw that I screwed up, I took ownership, and I provided a solution. That's more valuable than to say, "Hey, I screwed up. What do I do now?" You're providing an actual solution here.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, it kind of ties into this point, something that I read about, right? There's essentially 5 degrees of initiative that you can take when you're faced with a problem. So at the lowest level, it would be waiting until you're told what to do. The next would be asking what to do. Both of these you probably want to avoid. The ones that go a little bit further than this are exactly what we're saying is probably the best steps. Is you can either recommend and then take the action, or you can act and then advise as soon as you've acted, depending on what the type of problem is. And then the highest level that you may want to reach on eventually in your career, if not now, is actually just being able to act on your own and then routine support. Again, that's when you're confident enough, you've got enough skills and experience to actually solve the problem yourself. But for now, I guess the best steps again is really either recommending and then taking action, or acting and then advising as soon as you've taken that action, what you've done. And I guess again, try to tying this back into the actions that you can do. Sorry to take on this point of yours, Daniel, but really the actions that you can take from this point, it's really you can either flag the issue early. For example, if there is a problem that pops up, you pick up the phone or set up to set up time to actually discuss it. Or if you've been given a task and you're worried about always drip feeding questions back to your instructor, at least be like, okay, it'll take me about an hour or so to look through these documents. We set up a time after them, then I can ask you all the questions that come out of it. The other things you can do is, again, propose a draft solution, show that you're thinking about the problem itself, um, following through and providing updates as soon as anything sort of happens, and then asking, don't underestimate how willing people are to let you ask your colleagues for help, right? They're a resource as well. They're there to help you. They're usually able to give you a really good answer. To speed things along and actually solve the problem. But I guess the only caveat with that is if you're asking colleagues for help, especially for a task that you've been given, with at least let your supervisor know so that they know where the problem's kind of sitting. It gives the credit to the right people. It makes sure that everyone kind of understands who's helping out with what. Instead of just, the worst case scenario is if someone's given me a problem and I get someone else to help me with it, and the action is with them, then when I get checked out from my supervisor and they say, well, where are you up to? I say, well, Jim's helping me with it. Um, and they never knew. It's like, well, I'm just passing the buck. I'm not solving the problem. So feel free to ask, but the only caveat is flag it with your supervisor if you're getting help with it.
Yep. And I think actually leads in perfectly with the next one is push to completion. I think taking ownership of responsibility is one thing, but actually pushing to completion, giving it your 100%, having a finality to it is very important as well. So example once again, if you sent an email to say request for information and you didn't hear back, well, are you going to leave it at that, or are you going to find other ways to get in touch with the party, get the information that you need? What are you going to do to kind of end the task? Even if you don't have to use these workarounds now, at least you thought about it. You went through the process. So next time a similar thing comes up, or your colleague, similar thing comes up, you can actually advise them. So it's always kind of being able to think multiple avenues of approaching a problem. As we discussed also, following up, diarizing becomes a very important task when you're, say, on a major transaction or a case, especially when you're a junior, because many times partners will pop in and say, hey, Jason, where are we on with the ABC Corp? If you don't know and if you haven't diarized, it's hard for you to update them, right? So I think diarizing becomes a really important thing as a junior because once again, you become this kind of project manager very early in your career. I think also for push to completion, it's important to think on behalf of the lawyer that's giving you the work. If they gave you this task, if you gave someone a task, what would you want them to do? Would you want them to take ownership of it and basically allow you to focus on other things? Or would you want to continue to check up on them, right? The point of push to completion is that you can actually focus, like the other lawyer can focus on other things that are more high level. And it's kind of like a delegation of tasks, but also building that trust between each other to see, if I give you something, you'll have it done and properly. An example here is basically, say, filing documents with the regulator. Oftentimes you're in charge of drafting an application, you spend hours on it, and you just submitted it, done, right? That's not done because once you file it with the regulator, there's follow-ups. Did you get a confirmation email back from them? And even then, is it confirmation that it was accepted or that's going to be under review? So, pushing to completion is that to make sure that that application has been read, application is approved, and then you actually reporting to the supervising lawyer to say, hey, this is done. Application is accepted, and also I drafted you, just to be helpful, a draft email to send to the client so you can actually review. That is completion of drafting an application all the way to completion, in that you're making the life easier for the other lawyer, right? Drafting the email, I think, becomes very common as a junior because the lawyers are able to kind of audit your emails to make sure you have proper writing style, but also it kind of gives you an idea of how to communicate with clients generally. Jason, do you have any examples here?
Yeah, I think that, sorry, just to go back, I think that's a really good point, just to step into your supervisor's shoes and kind of try to do the task as if you're in their position and actually trying to solve the problem that way. And that's in contrast to thinking of them as a safety net, in terms of, oh, they'll fix up my work and then it'll go out. I think a good test to always ensure that you're thinking that way is, anytime you hand in a task, and check whether it's being done to you, your 100% is basically, if you press that send button, are you comfortable with it going directly to the client without being checked, or going to someone more senior in your organization without being checked by your immediate supervisor? And again, it's not about having the pure technical skills or being able to do a purely polished final legal product, but if you can say that you've done as much as you can to the best of your ability, then that's all that is kind of expected in terms of taking this problem solving approach. And I guess the example that kind of goes to this push to completion point ties back into the point about understanding the big picture when you're taking instructions, understanding the problem, and it's really for example the work product that you're doing. What does that actually turn into in the end? Because that really influences the way that you prepare it, and it could actually be to just say, okay, I've prepared it in this way that would go out. So you can, if you're comfortable with the whatever, send it out directly. So a good example is research memos. Again, you can write it in a very academic style, or you can write it so that here's the answer that you've been asked specifically, or you can take that next step and frame it so that you have a bit of an advice vibe to it. If it's being sent out as an advice, you can spend that first section saying, I've been asked this, these are the answers that I've come up with, this is how it commercially affects people, this is the substance of the advice. If you want further legal reasoning, it's below that. So even understanding the big picture in that context means you're preparing a research memo in a very different way than if you didn't have any of that big picture context.
Great,
Uh,
thanks. Yep, I think next.
Next point, mine again.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is towards the idea of problem solving in the sense that you're developing systems to improve the problems that you face now. So, if you're getting proper feedback on the problems that you've been solving, on the tasks that you're doing, you're going to be better equipped to actually develop solutions later on or anticipate problems and have a proper framework to deal with it better than you did before, right? That's essentially what experience and technical skill is. So I guess just to rattle off the actions that you can take to get proper, timely, specific feedback is, the really obvious. Just ask directly, but the way that you would do it is to be really specific and really timely about the feedback that you're asking for. So, just what I'm hearing from people who are way more experienced than me is giving feedback is actually one of the hardest things to do as a lawyer with juniors under them, because it's really hard. So, sometimes, especially in law firms, if you're happy with the work product, you just don't really say anything. It's only if there are problems that you kind of go up and say, by the way, fix this, fix this, fix this. So the way that people have asked for feedback is, hey, I've done that task for you. How was it? And because it's so general, it's really hard to give an answer. So the way that you kind of meet them halfway is, again, trying to be really specific and trying to be really timely with what you're asking feedback on. So something you might say is, hey, by the way, for that particular task that I was doing, I felt like I had a bit of trouble with X, Y, Z. I've approached it, you saw the way that I approached it. Do you have any sort of better way that you would have done it? So at least that way they can hone in on exactly what you're having an issue on, and not just give you the good old, general, it was pretty good, so don't worry about it. The other things you can do is, if there's a final work product that's been sent out, you can do a compare between that final work product and your draft to them. So you can see the changes, run through it yourself. Most of them will make sense. Some of them might not. For the ones that don't, again, you can ask for specific feedback by saying, these changes in particular didn't make sense. Do you mind walking me through? So yeah, again, really shows that you're proactive, shows that you're reliable, shows that you're trying to learn and actually set yourself up to solve problems better down the line. The other thing is, take advantage of the document management system. It's your friend. Being able to go in and see the emails that have been sent out, see the types of emails that people have written before, types of advices, types of documents that goes to their working style. That's a really big advantage. It's not taken advantage of enough, I guess, as junior lawyers, because especially if you're working with multiple supervisors, you can go into the file, you can look at how they've saved documents, how they've sent emails, how they've drafted their advices, and adjust your style accordingly and learn that way. And then I guess the final point that I'd say from asking for feedback is really tracking the feedback you've been given. So it's not just rumbling around in your head. It also really helps for you to get a better idea of your progress and give you a bit more confidence at work, because over time you kind of get drip feed fed experience and it feels like you're not really progressing as much as you actually are. So if you're tracking the feedback, you're tracking the way that you've addressed that feedback, you can get a really good history of what you've been doing and see how far you've come from when you initially started, rather than just relying on the, hey, you did this wrong, so fix it. You've done this wrong, so fix it. And I guess an example of how feedback sets you again into a problem solving mindset and being able to tackle problems better in future is if you know, take on that feedback and then implement systems to actually address the problems that you are experiencing with that type of task. So a big example that I face in construction is, we have this piece of legislation called the Security of Payment Act, where essentially we have to turn around a claim really fast within, 10 business days, right? 10 or 15 business days. And because that creates a lot of pressure and there's a lot of documents involved, it's always a rush or a sprint to the end. And the way that at one of the firms I worked at, where we always face this crush towards the end, we always face this grind, everyone was super stressed, was taking that step back, saying, okay, look, we're experiencing that problem with, everyone being super stressed towards the end. Essentially, these documents can be, that it's similar arguments are being run all the time. So let's create a proper system or precedent database for this type of matter specifically, so that the next time we need to do it, we don't need to start everything from scratch. We can pull something off the shelf and at least tailor it and not just be fully stressed towards the end. So that's an example of, taking that feedback, recognizing the problem that you or your team or your client is facing, and then turning that around and creating a better system that addresses it. Daniel, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I think I'll add one thing is that I think many people, when they think about asking for feedback, they look upwards. Just because you're working for someone up top, they will see kind of what you're doing, what you're doing. They have more experience, but I think we neglect the fact that those we work with, paralegals, legal secretaries, they know just as much, if not more. I know when I joined the firm initially, there were paralegals that were well experienced, doing, say, due diligence reports and whatnot, whereas I was very new to it. So why wouldn't you seek their advice as well? It doesn't need to be upwards in terms of kind of law firm hierarchy. And I think the benefit there is that the paralegals and legal secretaries are actually able to understand the preferences of the senior associate or the partners, and they're able to kind of actually share that with you to say, oh, partner A actually likes their header in this font and whatnot. So you don't have to actually ask directly for feedback from this partner or so and so. You can ask, discreetly, and by the time you submit a final document to them, they're like, oh wow, you actually know my preferences. You actually know what I like. So that's another way of kind of skirting around asking feedback directly on certain things. But obviously, if you're in a transaction and there's a teachable moment, I think it's better to ask for the partners. But I think many of us neglect legal secretaries and paralegals, and they saved me many times over. So I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And even just adding on to that a little bit, it's not always asking them for advice or feedback from something that you can receive from upstream. It's also, as you develop in your career, you're going to be delegating, you're going to be giving instructions, and having that feedback from the people you're instructing is really instrumental as well. You're not just being trained upstream, you also get trained from the people you're giving instructions to, so that you become a better lawyer, leader, manager. So don't overlook that. There's a lot of, it's a great point, Daniel. Yeah, don't just look upwards for feedback.
And I'll actually just add one more thing. The whole feedback thing is actually quite useful in terms of office politics. Inevitably, whatever workplace you're at, there's going to be office politics. So asking for feedback is not just in terms of your kind of legal work, but in terms of what you kind of give out, whether people enjoy working with you, whether people enjoy being around you. If you're a bit crass in the office, or if you're a bit timid, people will tell you these things if you ask them, right? Because they want you to fit in as well. So I think don't be shy to ask, but also expect certain answers if you come back asking for this kind of feedback. So I think that's also good for in terms of kind of office morale, is to understand where you stand with everyone. Okay, so I guess we're into general things to keep in mind. These are kind of other tidbits, things that we kind of learned along the way. So yeah, number one could be set out answers first in any research memos you do, advice, particularly email advice. Um, so usually it's when you're asked a question, it's good to kind of list out what your answer is and then dive deeper into your rationale. The reason is because partners barely have any time to read their emails as is. So you want to lay out your findings right away and then justify it. If they don't, if they see the answer and they have a hunch that that may not be accurate, they don't even have to delve into your email. They can just right away say, hey, listen, think a little bit off track here. This is what you should be looking at. But also particularly for client emails, when, like say a partner asks you, can you draft a draft email for me to send to clients? Clients definitely do not have the time to go through the rationale. They just want to hear yes or no, if they can do something or not, and why, very quickly, why. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Jason discussed this already, but if you don't know the answer, don't guess. Just don't pretend. Just say, I don't know. I'll find out for you, but I don't know. I think you can spot a liar a mile away. And that's just not a good look. I think there's more, humility is a good thing, I think. So understanding what you know and what you don't know and expressing that clearly.
Yeah, and I think it's not even just, lying about it. It's literally if you there's always a pressure to feel like you have to know the answer straight away, and sometimes you're just giving a guesstimate. But often, if you just say, "Hey, by the way, I haven't looked into that yet, but if you give me another hour or so, I'll come back to you with an answer," that's perfectly okay. So yeah, don't feel like you need to pretend to know or estimate an answer if you're not comfortable with it.
Yeah, and say, like, for instance, there may be a situation where you are guesstimating, you are kind of 70% sure, but you're not. Provide your rationale, provide your thinking process. I think, sometimes even if you're wrong, at least the lawyer is like, okay, well, I mean, Jason thought it through. I think he's on the right track, but he kind of sweared here, right? So I think it's good to kind of, if you have an idea, to express it, to share your thoughts, but that's only if you kind of in the ballpark, kind of know what you're talking about. I think another thing is uh, understanding your credit, where credit is due and where is not. I think generally as a junior lawyer, you're a shadow player. So sometimes you're asked to draft kind of marketing materials, research memos, and whatnot. Your name may not be on it. I think that's okay. I think in terms of recognition, just it's good to think not individually, but as a group and as a team. So wherever you're being helpful to the team, I think that's your takeaway from it. Not just, I drafted this. I definitely should get credit for this. Or it's that kind of nitpickiness that lawyers don't like, because especially when you're a team environment. Jason, do you have anything to add there?
Um, Not so much. I think it's just, there's always it's always nice to get your name on things. But really, especially in the first few years of your career, um, it does get recognized, even if they don't stamp your name on it. They know what sort of work you're doing. They know what sort of thinking process and attitude you're bringing to work. So don't put too much stock into the final work product being, having your name on it or being copied into it or whatever, because sometimes that's just not the working style. But just understand that it's okay and you're going to be fine. You're going to get credit for it internally. It'll work out.
Yep, exactly. Right. I think that brings us to the end. And I guess we can kind of treat this as a Q&A, open up to the floor. If anyone has a question, feel free to unmute and ask away.
Hi, Daniel. I was just wanting you to elaborate a bit more on what you had spoken on in the penultimate slide about seeking feedback in terms of office morale and from your team, how it is that you'd actually go about that, and perhaps provide us with an example.
Yeah. So I think I mean, like, say, for instance, you're speaking to your legal secretary and whatnot. You can kind of ask, oh, I mean, I sometimes straight up ask, what does everyone else think about me? Do you think I'm a bit loud? I always think I'm a bit loud. I think a little self-deprecating humor is fun. So that's how I kind of get around the awkwardness of asking feedback on my personality, right? Um, but I kind of also share, for me, it's like, oh, I love working with you guys. You guys are very helpful. You guys are very fun and this and that. So it's kind of like a bit of back and forth conversational. Um, but I think sometimes just ask straight. I think they appreciate that. All right, any other questions? Has anyone come across these kind of situations where you had to ask for feedback or had to problem solve, either within another role or even at law school and whatnot? You'd like to share?
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to ask something that I sort of came across during my vacation schemes. So basically, there's always this sort of struggle of like, when do I ask for help, and then when do I not ask for help? So do you have any sort of advice on when it's sort of when I get assigned a task and when I don't know how to do like a certain step or a certain stage of it? So like, who should I ask and like when should I ask? Because I'll always be like afraid of like asking, for example, the partner. But whereas if I ask like my sort of trainee supervisor in a VAC scheme scenario, they may not know the answer. So in that sort of scenario, should I feel comfortable and move up to ask maybe an associate, senior associate, or should I keep researching and try and sort of find it on my own?
Yeah, Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks for passing that. I think, yeah, I think it's always good to, I think it's important to understand that you're always going to be okay asking questions. It kind of ties back into that point of if there may be someone better positioned to help you with the task than you're initially doing, just by trying to ram your head into a brick wall over and over again. But again, if you're feel free to actually ask the people who aren't immediately on the same matter as you, or you don't think are the same level. It's really good to try to get to that senior associate or associate between you and the partner and just say, hey, how would you approach it, or have you seen this sort of thing before? But again, if you're showing, you know, you've thought about it, you've got that problem, you've tried X, Y, Z, you're hitting this problem, you're not getting a solution because of this, how would you address it? If you're framing the question that way and you're putting in the legwork initially, then that's always going to come back good. And also, if you're saying that to the partner as well, hey, I know you've given me that task, it's due at this time, but again, I've hit this problem, I've tried X, Y, Z, it didn't work because of this. Do you mind if I try to pick whoever's brain to work on a solution together? And that way, you're not in a position where you're just, again, throwing the monkey from your back onto theirs for them to take care of. You're working with other people to feed the monkey yourself, right? So yeah, it comes down to those things: understanding it's okay and trying things yourself, and trying to solve the problem yourself first.
Thanks.
Hi there, if I could ask a question as well. This is Isabella, and I will not turn my camera on for everyone's sake because I'm wearing my pajamas and my hair is up. What I wanted to ask was basically on this feedback part of things. To start with, I just want to say thank you as well, because it feels like it could be a 101 of all the questions you've always wanted to ask and never really had the courage or the means to do so. So thank you for that. But the question that I had and surrounding feedback is, we all know it can be really tricky to have this type of conversations, not only for the one who asks, but sometimes the person giving that feedback doesn't necessarily feel comfortable giving it in all honesty, should there be some criticism. Have any of you come across a situation where you asked for feedback and the person basically said, no, it's all good, but you felt like he wasn't? And how did you deal with it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, what do you think, Daniel?
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, there are instances where I've asked for feedback. I know there are areas I could do better, and then the other side says, yeah, I think it's good. It's it's fine. I think for me, I try to dive deeper in that I kind of admit to what I think I could have done better. So even if they say, I think it's fine. Well, I say, well, you know what, I think, like starting off, I think I could have done this better. I think, because of this, this is what happened. But I think, going forward, if I knew what I know now, the next transaction we're on, it could be much better. What do you think? Right. I think I try to push it onto them and to say that, criticize myself, but in a helpful way. That where I improve, it's going to help you in the long run. It's going to help you on your transactions. So it's in your interest to actually help me here, to give me this kind of constructive criticism.
Yeah, that's pretty good advice. Because it kind of tackles the two things, right? Like one, they're either not going to give you honest feedback because they're worried about hurting your feelings. In which case, if you're kind of pointing out things that you feel like you haven't done right, it shows that you're okay with it and gives them a bit more confidence and leeway to actually give you that constructive feedback without worrying that they'll hurt your feelings in a non-constructive way. And then the other is if you frame it in terms of the benefits of what happens if you do get that feedback, that really gives them a bit of an incentive to give you that honest feedback, go past those barriers, and then also shows that you're teachable, and they can get a return out of putting themselves in an uncomfortable position. But again, those are kind of like the general things. Those are the actions that you can do to try to meet them halfway. I guess the disclaimer is not all lawyers are great managers and leaders and able to give good feedback, and sometimes you just encounter people like that, in which case you can try to your best and try to get feedback from them, but that's just not what they're going to be able to do for you. So again, if that's the type of scenario if you're able to ask other people that you may not directly work for, or try to work more directly with other people who do provide feedback, then at least you're skirting around that particular problem yourself.
Yep. And I'll also add on the flip side, you mentioned about when you give feedback yourself, it's not comfortable, right? Especially if there are kind of criticisms that you have. And I think for feedback, it's always good to start off with something good. There's three things that the other person did well. And then when you dive into the feedback, I think the key is to be empathetic, to understand that things go wrong. So if you're on your first transaction, you kind of start off with saying, I understand the first transaction is scary, right? There's a lot of moving parts. So missing something is completely fine. You miss this thing here. I mean, I miss it all the time too, right? So the empathy really helps with giving that criticism, and that's not it becomes constructive versus it becomes just criticism. So I think in giving feedback, it's always good to keep in mind empathy.
Thank you.
Hi, Daniel and Jason. Thanks for hosting today. So my question was for Daniel, and just if you can elaborate what you meant by diarizing when it came to meeting with your partner and briefing them about where your matter's up to.
Yeah. So what I mean by diarizing is that generally every partner has a tolerance for getting updates. So some might like the end of the day updates, some might like every 2-3 days. But the thing is, when you're on multiple deals with multiple partners, sometimes it's hard to remember, oh shoot, did I update so-and-so already? So it's good to say in your Outlook calendar, say just to slot in 9 a.m., catch up with partner A, B, and C on this matter. And basically it's basically a diarizing format for you. Now if you work better on your phone, if you have another format, you have a notebook, whatever works for you. But I find that for me, writing it down but also putting in my Outlook helps, because in the morning I get the notifications and I'm reminded, okay, yes, I need to update them, because they may be too busy to actually ask me for an update. But if I leave it too long, it's going to be on me for not providing the update in a timely manner. So that's what I mean by kind of diarizing.
I think that's pretty good. And I guess the only thing I'd add to that, just to frame it, is you don't want to be in a position where you're getting chased up for things, or asked about what's happening. So if you're putting a reminder to yourself, if diarizing is the way that you do things, right? If you put a reminder to yourself, or if you diarize a session with the partner to discuss things specifically, at least everyone knows when you're going to give a progress update. They're never, questioning where you're at with certain things. You're taking a really proactive approach to it. That's just going to come off better in terms of effective teamwork. So it depends on the system, but generally, because everyone's kind of wedded to their calendars, diarising it does work.
Do we have any other questions?
I've got a question, if that's right.
Yeah.
Talking of feedback, I think you guys have done great today. Thank you so much for especially sharing examples. I find that really, really useful. I'm in house, and so there's not quite that same community as I find in private practice. So my question was more on the support side of things, especially during COVID. I was wondering if you guys had any tips on sort of how you've managed to deal with sometimes the lack of support due to the COVID circumstances we find ourselves in.
And support, do you mean in terms of kind of resources or in terms of speaking to someone?
I think for me personally, it's been speaking to someone, but you could put both in there, couldn't you? I think.
I have a quick answer for that. I guess in light of COVID, I think everyone's working from home. So I'm a big believer that we should be taking this time to network as much as we can, because our network is our resource, right? Remember we talked about how being resourceful means, if you had a friend that's doing white collar crime, you can ask them. If you have a friend that's doing litigation, you can ask them, right? So this is the time to kind of expand that network, connect with people on LinkedIn. So say your practice is in I don't know, international trade, connect with other international trade lawyers, right? Build that kind of rapport. So later on, you can kind of lean on and say, hey, listen, we're in the same industry, got a question for you, right? They're not going to bill you. I hope they don't bill you, because then they're not really good friends. But, they should be off the bat like, hey, listen, this is what I think. You can use this resource. I can send you this. Speak to my friend here, so and so. So I think in light of COVID, I think the best opportunity right now is to network with others in similar industries and actually to share information in that sense. Jason?
Yeah, and that's the external approach, right? So I think that all makes sense if you're reaching out externally, and definitely take advantage of that opportunity. I think if you're looking for internal resources, like feedback, training, people to bounce ideas off internally, and you're just all working from home, and I get it, right? You don't have that advantage of being able to bump into your supervisor in the lunchroom and say, by the way, I've got this quick question. So really, the way that I've been trying to address it is really trying to be more proactive with that communication, trying to set up times to discuss certain things, checking their calendar and saying, hey, looks like you have a slot here. Do you mind if we take a look at a few of the questions I had about XYZ during this time? Feel free to, pick up the phone and, hey, do you have a minute about blah, blah, blah. I think overcome that reluctance and thinking that people will be annoyed by you asking them questions or asking for help, and get into the frame of mind that everyone's trying to work together to solve problems. So you taking a proactive approach is actually helpful to that rather than being annoying. Hopefully that's what you've been asking. I'm guessing it's Alec from London. So let me seriously clarify if that's not hitting the point, and if it's a bit longer, happy to take it offline, either Daniel or myself. So yeah, just let us know.
That was exactly it. Thank you so much. Yes, especially you don't have the opportunity to bump into sort of key stakeholders. You're stuck in your kitchen like I am. It's a bit of a different environment. But all very useful advice. Thanks, guys.
Sweet. And I think just the final thing, because you mentioned, yes, this presentation is really tailored towards private practice. I think some of the in-house elements you can definitely take from this, but I think some of it specifically for in-house, right? One of the big matters is resourcing and how, if you're getting enough resources and help to solve particular problems. And I know one of the examples that I was trying to raise as well on this point is, you need to try and pull people together to solve the problem if you're not able to do it yourself within the time. And a really good thing that one of my friends did was he was realizing that he was doing work as a team of one person servicing however many stakeholders in his business, that he was becoming a bottleneck. So what he did was look at that problem and say, okay, what is a potential solution to solve that particular problem other than just working harder, because it wasn't getting it done. And he identified that what he needed was an external counsel on a secondment basis to come in instead of their usual hiring process, and structure something and being able to allocate work to that person for specific tasks that were just burning up too much time. And because he presented that as a draft solution, it actually worked out really well. It made him look really good. And again, it was solving a particular problem that occurs commonly in-house. So hopefully that also helps frame some of the examples that you might look for in your in-house role. But again, yeah, a lot of this was private practice, but hopefully a fair bit of it is also transferable to in-house.
Okay, do we have any further questions?
Sweet. Yeah, I think, look, again, it's a really small world. You kind of all got exposure to this particular webinar from LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with Daniel and myself on that platform. Feel free to reach out. Always happy to have a chat. Daniel's been having 30-minute chats with like the whole world, it seems, about their particular careers. Me, I kind of do it if people want to ask me a question for it. So yeah, seriously, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, same. I echo same thing. Once again, the whole point of this is to actually help each other out, right? And as I said, take this opportunity to kind of network with each other, build your network. We're here, so if you need a construction law advice, you got Jason. If you need private equity advice, you got me. Lean on your network, right? I think that's kind of like a good takeaway. And if there's any other topics that you want to discuss, we're more than happy to hear it. So shoot us a message. And yeah, we do this for fun. We actually quite enjoy it. So it takes time, but we do enjoy it. So do let us know your feedback. And yeah, thank you for coming out.
Seriously, if you have like particular topics, please let us know. It's super helpful, and it's super hard coming up with topics sometimes.
Yeah,
so
we're
yes,
asking
feel
for
free to
feedback
reach out.
too, pushing for feedback. So all
Great.
right,
Thank you all for the attending.
great. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.